So, good morning again. Welcome back. We are now going into the next destination, which is our destination INFRASERV. This is all about access provisions, which are important for the quality of the research, but also for the training of our researchers. We will have Agnès in a minute presenting the different topics that range from those driven by agreed challenges and EU priorities to those looking into frontier research. We also have, as a novelty, a big topic on co-funded access provisions. So a lot of interesting stuff to come. And also a reminder that under this destination, we strongly encourage to provide fast-track access for Ukrainian researchers. So include that also in your thinking when you develop proposals, how this can be made possible. So I hope, I see Agnès is switching on her camera, very good. Then we hope that her microphone works as well. And then off we go. And I'll be back with you later on because I'll also be presenting some technicalities on the co-fund actions and the Cascade funding. Over to you, Agnès.
Thank you very much, Jörg. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to introduce you to the INFRASERV destination. So we have, as Jörg mentioned, we have 3 topics, and I will start with the first one. So here it's a novelty under Horizon Europe, not a novelty in the Horizon Europe work program, because we had already this approach in the last work program, but it's new compared to Horizon 2020. It's really the challenge-driven approach. So in research infrastructure services to enable research and innovation, addressing main challenges and EU priorities. So targeted approach. A type of action is still research and innovation action. So budget is a bit over 100 billion. And we have expected EU contribution per project ranging from 8 to a bit more than 14 million euro. So we expect a number of projects around 8, depending on the requested EU contribution by individual proposal. The opening of the call, nothing special, the same as for the other topic presented until now, and deadline 9th of March. Next, please. So here I'm presenting the what is common to all areas under this topic. First of all, the context. So we need to address complex and urgent socioeconomic and environmental challenges, and in particular environmental transition. And this requires, among others, interdisciplinary approach, challenge-driven provision of customized services, able to accelerate the research cycle and to help to deliver solutions. So the main expected outcome that's infrastructure are able to provide innovative, customized and efficient research infrastructure services that are able to enhance and increase society's long-term and consistent problem-solving capacities and provide evidence-based policy making, information for evidence-based policy making. So that's really a core expected outcome of all areas called under this topic. But as you will see later, you have also additional specific outcome per areas, but don't forget this main one. With regard to the scope, so I'm just reminding the overarching common scope to all areas, and here is just some excerpt from the work program. So really it's important that you refer to the work program to get the full information, because in some case it's really important to really check that in detail. As Jörg mentioned, the main aspect is to provide access. So it can be transnational access, and here we are referring, as in the past, both on-site access to installation or services, or remote access, which could be exchange of samples or access to high-performance computing services, so remote access. It can also, of course, provide virtual access to integrated and customized infrastructure services. Still challenge-driven, in each of the areas that I will detail further. What is important is that we are not starting from scratch. We had in the past support to what we call under Horizon 2020 advanced communities, starting communities. So we had some provision of services. So we are building on that. And so we expect that in this project, you are able to provide access to a wide range of complementary top-level research infrastructures and facilitating interdisciplinary. It doesn't mean that each installation should offer interdisciplinary services, but we expect that the portfolio of infrastructure and services make possible interdisciplinary research. When we are referring to research infrastructure, to the installation, we expect that it's offered by the beneficiaries of the consortium, but also affiliated entities, third parties, and here I would remind that under Horizon Europe, it's in-kind contribution without cost, so it's different from if you are used to Horizon 2020, it's a bit different. But you have an additional flexibility that we are really encouraging is also to have beneficiary purchasing service to external providers to avoid to inflate the size of the core consortium in this project. Among the scope, I would just highlight that we expect you to provide ad hoc training to the users and to offer the appropriate scientific and technical support to these external users, not necessarily familiar with the service and the facilities that you will bring in your portfolio. The cost to customize, to adapt the services are, of course, covered. The focus is really on the provision of access. Nevertheless, limited development of new services is possible, but it should be really limited, meaning that you have some incremental improvement of your services. You are able to customize or combine services, but this development we should see the result by the end of the project, meaning that you make some limited development, and in the second part of the project, or at least minimum the last year, you are able to offer these adapted services to the communities. Of course, data management, interoperability, connection to EOSC, making data and gathered during the project available to the EOSC and other data infrastructure is important. Contributing to global standards, paying attention to international initiatives, that's really, really important. It's not mentioned here, but it will be, we'll try to remind that for each area. This is challenge driven, meaning that you are helping to address some priorities at EU level. So we really expect you to take into account the initiative, in particular the one under the other pillars of Horizon Europe, for example, Pillar 2, the mission, the partnership, the ongoing project under Horizon Europe, under these other pillars, that really you adapt your services to serve these communities, these developments that are ongoing, in particular under Horizon Europe. So really pay attention when preparing your proposal that you have the appropriate links to a major initiative during not only at the proposal level, but also during the life of the project. So that was really the key message for the scope in general. And then we will move, of course, to individual areas. We have 10 areas. Next slide, please. So the first area is about research linking environmental factors to human health. So here I've listed the expected outcome, and it's not it's not a selection from the work program, unless I'm wrong. It's really the expected outcome for these areas that you will find in the work program. So what we expect is that we have better risk assessment tools and data evidence to anticipate and mitigate negative environmental implications on human health. And here you have to link with initiative under other projects under Horizon Europe. Evidence to inform policymaking and public health bodies with respect to assessment and management of environmental risk for human health. And of course, wider access, because that's the core objective of this destination, wider access to specialized services to underpin the competitiveness of the European industry and of SMEs active in the field of risk assessment and management of environmental impact on human health. That was for the expected outcome for this area. For the scope, so here again, please refer to the work program for full information. But really, it's to integrate and give access to a wide range, and the word wide is important, of monitoring and experimental infrastructures services, still to investigate the effect of environmental exposure. And we are giving some example, collection of samples and data on environmental risk factors, high throughput measurements to quantify substance of concern, access to advanced bioinformatic tools, integration and access to diverse data. And here there is an important reference to, for example, One Health approach. So really don't build your services in isolation, really take into account this One Health approach. And here we are giving some example, human omics, population cohort, environmental factor, and so on. So that was for the expected outcome and the scope, and really refer to the work program and make sure that you have the link with the appropriate initiatives under Horizon Europe pillars, in particular the other pillars. Next slide, please. Still in the health area, we have a second area called services for improving clinical research in the pediatric areas. So among the, for the expected outcome, we expect advancement of pediatric medicines and other therapeutic and diagnostic approaches for this population group to market and towards clinical use. We expect accelerated available of solutions and products to pediatric patients in need. Overall wider access to rationally designed infrastructure services across Europe to underpin the competitiveness of the European industry and of biotech SMEs developing pediatric medicine and treatment and diagnostics devices. So here the link with industry SMEs is particularly important. As outcome, we also expect that it will facilitate the joining of force of research infrastructures and pediatric competence networks in EU, member states and associated countries to facilitate pediatric research in the context of pertinent EU regulatory environment. And I've underlined that because it's really important aspects that researchers need to have support to do their research in the context of this EU regulatory environment, and we expect that it's part of the service that you offer, you facilitate that. Another expected outcome is the availability of innovative tools to conduct pediatric clinical trials, also facilitating the reuse of population and historical data, and to enhance data sharing across actors at different care levels and across regions in Europe. For the scope, I'm just giving some key message here, but please refer to the work program for really the exhaustive description to integrate and give access to infrastructure services to enable and accelerate research and innovation towards innovative biomedical products and therapies for children, including newborns. Mentioned that because pediatric research is often faced with locally dispersed case incidences, the wider geographical outreach and international cooperation beyond Europe is strongly encouraged. Next slide, please. Now we are moving to another area with the services for climate change risk. The expected outcome is enhanced and integrated cross-disciplinary research infrastructure capabilities addressing climate-related risks in Europe, and in particular support relevant research and innovation objective of Horizon Europe Cluster 5 and 6 and of the mission on climate adaptation. So really here again, makes the link with the other initiative under Horizon Europe, and here we are mentioning some, but during the life of the project, it will be important that you check what's going on and you adapt, you open your services relevant to priorities under these other pillars of Horizon Europe. Of course, harmonization of data policies and management of IPRs and ethical issues are key. Interoperability across discipline and with risk management, existing risk management platform is really important. And at the end, we expect that researchers in the environment and climate change are able to optimally exploit the research infrastructure services relevant for that research. With regard to the scope, I'm just keeping some putting here some key message. So we expect access to an integrated wide range of research infrastructure services. It does mean that it should cover all possible infrastructure installation existing, but really you should not have a narrow approach. You really to try to have the broadest portfolio which makes sense. To support research innovation addressing climate-related risk in Europe, and this includes also the social aspect. We are referring to prediction, mitigation, and adaptation measures that are required for an integrated and strongly cross-disciplinary approach, and to provide access to quite diverse, very diverse research infrastructure. And here we are referring to observatories, experimental facilities, modeling capacities, data infrastructure in general. So here again, we are not starting from nothing. We had in the past support to different communities. So we really expect that you build on this existing integration that took place in the past. You are able to select the most relevant key infrastructure offering the key services. Next slide, please. I think I have to accelerate a bit. Now we are referring to the area for sustainable polar regions, and we are referring to Arctic because we are building on existing communities, but it's really polar regions that are targeted, facilitating science for understanding and predicting key processes in polar region in the context of climate change, enhance and further integrated capacities in polar region, including in particular in support of EU Arctic policy, European Green Deal priorities, and other relevant international climate initiatives. For the scope, we just referred that we are again building on past integration of access to different type of infrastructure, terrestrial station, fixed or mobile observing platform, vessels operating in the area, including icebreakers, core repositories, and here it's not it's data repositories. We are really referring to physical samples, for example, from drilling the seafloor, data infrastructures. So key message that proposal should further integrate, customize or combine services, adapt, combine modalities of access to facilitate really again interdisciplinary approach, because we are in areas where we will try to tackle complex processes. Next slide. Moving to services for healthy ocean and waters. So we are here, we are making links with many initiatives. So the expected outcome is enabling, facilitating research and infrastructure, research innovation for clean oceans and waters, as well as for climate change. So quite a broad topic. And here we have links, in particular links to one of the mission, restore ocean and waters by 2030. Still European Green Deal, and many relevant international climate initiatives. So here again, pay attention to what's going on in particular at international level and also in the other pillar of Horizon Europe. With regard to the scope, again, we are building on what we have done in the past. So there were past integration of access to facilities. So we are referring to both marine and freshwater experimental facilities, also analytical platform, again, fixed or mobile observing platform, vessels. And then we expect really that under this proposal, you take care of further integrating, customizing, combining available services, adapting modalities of access to facilitate the development phase of this mission, and also facilitate relevant research and innovation activities related to clean environment and climate action in ocean and fresh waters. Next slide. Still a related area, we are not leaving the water infrastructure services for sustainable aquaculture, fisheries, and blue economy. So here again, we expect outcome to relevant initiative under Horizon Europe in particular in this field, and we are referring to in particular some policy initiative, common fisheries policy, the farm to fork strategy, sustainable blue economy, and still again and again the European Green Deal. So that's really important, this connection. For the scope, again, we are building on past integration. I will not read all of them, but we had in the past integration of aquaculture experimental platform. We have marine biological resources. We have analytical platform, all type of marine data and observing platforms. So that should be considered when preparing this proposal. And here again, interdisciplinary is a key word in support of priorities, EU priorities in particular. Next. Now we are moving to energy, renewable energy technologies and systems. So the expecting outcome is really connected to the EU priorities, increasing energy efficiency, foster wider use of renewable energy. So in particular, in support of the objective of the European Green Deal with a climate neutrality by 2050, the Fit for 55 energy targets, the set plant action, on integrating renewable technologies in the energy systems. Overall, we expect wider access for both academic and industrial researchers to enhance and further integrated research infrastructure services overall in support of the green transition. With the scope, and here is just key message, please refer to the work program for the full information. We are building again on past experience. We want to further integrate services used to be provided by key research infrastructure in different fields of solar power, hydrogen, biofuels, offshore renewable energies, and also integrated grids, including energy storage. So quite a broad scope. So you have to provide broader access at EU level to relevant services, and that include grid integration to support all these priorities. Again, we expect you to customize and combine different services and to address the entire value chain from materials, technology development to applications. Next slide. Now we are moving to the area on services for innovative application for nanoscience and nanotechnology. So you have a long list of expected outcome, enabling research innovation in innovative nanoscience and nanotechnology application to support European scientific and industrial competitiveness. This includes innovative solid state, biological and soft materials needed for the green and digital transition. We expect cross-fertilization and transfer of knowledge and technologies across diverse scientific disciplines and material classes, overall wider access for academic and industrial researchers to enhance and further integrated services, fostering application of nanoscience and nanotechnologies to address emerging socio-economic needs. We expect enhanced competitiveness of European industry in the field through the access to this broader spectrum of advanced research tools. Another expected outcome is the positioning of top-level research infrastructure in the field as reliable innovation partners for worldwide researchers and European innovators. And finally, a key important is to enhance safety of R&D activities on nanomaterials and their use, reducing possible health and environmental risks. So that's really a very specific expected outcome under this area. With regard to the scope, here again, we are building on past efforts in integrating access to facilities, and we are giving some example of experimental installation for micro and nanofabrication, analytical and modeling simulation facilities, etc. So what we expect is that we will reach a higher and more interdisciplinary level of integration compared to what was achieved in the past, and to offer access to a coherent and complementary set of services. Here again, customizing, combining them when necessary to support both academic and industrial research teams. As said, safety issues of nanoparticles to be taken into account is really important. But please refer to the whole work program. Thanks. Now we are moving to semiconductors. That's here the aim is to enhance the EU capacity for the development of semiconductors, and it's really a topic in the an area of high priorities in the current context. So we expect that this project will facilitate and enable research innovation in support to the competitiveness and autonomy of the European semiconductor industry and contribution to the European Chips Act, in particular, wider access for academic and industrial researchers to further integrated and enhanced services in the field. Another key aspect is the transfer of knowledge and technologies between academic research institutions and the semiconductor industry, really to advance further the digital transition. With the scope, we are building again on past efforts in integrating access to facilities, and we are giving some example of nanoelectronic research infrastructure, printing facilities for electronics, and so on. And here again, wider integrated catalog of complementary infrastructure services, facilitating these services. Next, and we are, I think, coming to the last areas with services for shaping the future generation society, expecting an outcome with the scientific evidence for successful implementation of the next generation EU, including societal dimension of the recovery from the crisis, ongoing economic, social, and environmental transformation, insight on the different societal groups, in particular linked to the EU missions, contribution to the EU youth strategy, evidence of specific patterns, skills to foster active inclusion and various societal groups. With regard to the scope, again, build on the past effort in integrating different surveys, social data archives, and makes a link to the next generation EU priorities, EU youth strategy. And with that, I think I'm closing this topic.
Very good, Agnes. I would suggest we simply move on to the next topic. So you can cover both INFRASERV 0102 and 0103, and then back to me for my presentation.
I'm okay with the timing, just for you.
We are a little bit ahead of time, so take the time that you need. No problem.
Okay.
We have sufficient time.
Because there were many slides. Thanks a lot, Jörg. So we are now moving to the second topic, again focusing on access, but now it's not anymore targeted, challenge-driven approach, but we are with the more curiosity-driven, frontier knowledge, and bottom-up research and innovation action. The budget, you can see 25 million, and we expect EU contribution. We have the range from 8 to 14.5 million, but I will come back to that because depending on the area called, the range of budget is slightly different. We expect to fund 2 projects, but also, of course, it will depend on the expected EU contribution, call opening and deadline, nothing particular, the same as for the other topic. Next, please. So with regard to the context, I think you are very familiar with that because that's for our core activities in the past. We are research infrastructure are key players in the generation of fundamental knowledge. They are drivers of scientific excellence in Europe. So we want to enable the advancement of frontier knowledge in areas that are complementary to those actually addressed through the other approach that I've just presented, the challenge-driven approach. The expected outcomes are quite generic to all areas, wider, simplified, and more efficient access to the best research infrastructures available to researchers to conduct curiosity-driven research, irrespective of the location of the researchers. We expect really breakthrough and leading edge research enabled by advanced research infrastructure services made available to a wider user community. So we really hope that the key research infrastructure will try to outreach to beyond their usual standard user communities. We expect improve and harmonize research infrastructure services and broader use of research infrastructure resources across the EU and associated countries, deriving from the exploitation of synergies and complementarities. So compared to the past, we want different communities maybe coming together and to develop synergies in the way they are offering access and being complementary. One important outcome is also that you are, by making access to these top level facilities, you are also training a new generation of researchers that are trying to optimally exploit all the essential tools for their research. So really, if you are outreach, extending your user community of users, you have to provide the appropriate services and ad hoc training, ad hoc support and scientific services to facilitate this access to these new users. We also expect facilitating cross-disciplinary facilitation, wider sharing of information, knowledge and technologies across scientific fields, fostered by closer interaction between researchers active in and around research infrastructures. And finally, we expect also impact on the facilities themselves with better management, including implementing fair data principle of the continuous flow of data collected or produced by the research infrastructures. In this call, in this period, we are calling three main domains. Terrestrial biodiversity and ecosystems, including forests. That's the first area. The domain. The second domain is astronomy and astroparticle physics, arts and humanities. And I think here we are having the broader, we expect a larger budget ranging up to 14 million euro. And we have a last area. I don't know why these slides are moving here and changing slide all the time, at least for me. We have the third domain, arts and humanities, and here we expect rather budget around 8 and 10 millions with taking into account the actual cost of the operating cost of the facilities. So that was here for frontier knowledge. I think we can move to the next topic. And maybe we will take a bit more time for this new topic on co-fund. So as Jörg mentioned, here we are having a novelty. We are piloting the co-fund approach for access to pan-European research infrastructure and or national research infrastructure. So the type of action is co-fund, and I will come back later on what it means in practice. And also we will have a more detailed description of this co-fund action by Jörg after my presentation. The indicative budget for the topic is 12 million, and we expect EU contribution requested EU contributions per project around 2 to 5 million, depending on the areas. The indicative number of projects expected to be funded is 3 projects. So the call opening and just checking because I received some message I will see later. So indicative number of project is to be funded is 3. About the other condition, I would like to highlight that in this specific case of the co-fund, we expect to have at least 3 research infrastructure, S3s or ERICs or equivalent infrastructure as a core beneficiaries in this consortium from 3 different member states or associated countries, but we will come back to that later. Next slide, please. So really, we are the objective is to provide infrastructure services to advance frontier knowledge and to engage other source of funding, not restricted to the Horizon Europe support to access to these facilities. So the context is a bit the same that for the former topics that we want to address research infrastructure that are key players in the generation of fundamental knowledge and drivers of scientific excellence in Europe to enable the advancement of frontier knowledge in areas complementary to those addressed through the challenge-driven approach. So really the expected outcome is that we have access programs to research infrastructure in the EU and associated countries that can enhance their openness at European level. And that means that it should embrace the support with national funding to assure transnational users in their normal operation. So it's really an incentive to open access, the normal access of this infrastructure to broader transnational users put in their normal operation. So the long-term objective would be to not make any difference between users from the countries, from users from other countries. Okay, advances frontier knowledge, I've already mentioned. The scope, as I said, is really it's a pilot, it's a test for co-funding where we expect member states and associated countries offering program of access to research infrastructure at EU level, enabling curiosity-driven interdisciplinary research in a chosen area. So we expect a project by co-fund approach by large domain in a selected area, and here we are not mentioning any specific area. So that's up to the consortia to be ready to have this support for the co-funding from their institution and national programs. Next slide. Jörg will enter much more than me in the detail of the co-fund, but I would like to highlight some specific aspect for this co-fund action in particular. So what is important, of course, to note is the funding rate, 70% of the eligible cost. And in your proposal, you must clearly explain how the EU funding will be completed by other national or international funding sources. So that must be really explicitly mentioned in the proposal. One other key message here is that you can implement the access program to your facilities two ways, and you have to select one option. It cannot be a combination of both. Either the access program is directly implemented by the consortium with the provision of transnational and or virtual access by the beneficiaries or third parties or external providers of purchase services. So quite similar to what you have been used to do under Horizon 2020 and under the other topics in this INFRASERV call, INFRASERV destination. So that's the first option. Or you can go to the mechanism of financial support to third parties, what we typically call cascade granting. So that's really important. Make your choice, see what is most relevant, adapted to your consortium, and decide what is the best option for your particular case. What we expect is that in this scheme, we expect to have the national or international access program managers, including legal entities of distributed European research infrastructures. These are expected to be the core partners in the consortium. So really the program managers, including when it's, for example, ARICs of distributed infrastructure, they are expected to really be the core partners in the consortium. Then, of course, it will depend on the approach you have selected, direct implementation or cascade grantings, how you build your consortium. But really keep that in mind. The proposal should include the list of services and installations that will be made available by the action for transnational or virtual access. You must also provide the estimated amount of units of access made available for users. So that's quite similar to the other topics, the INFRASERV topics, and for those who are not familiar with INFRASERV, it's also quite similar to what happened under Horizon 2020. That's in general. If you want, you opt for the financial support to third parties, I will introduce here some nuance. So we don't expect you with the Cascade granting to really give an exhaustive list of all the services and installation and the estimated amount of units of access. We expect you to describe the different types of research infrastructure services, meaning that we don't expect you to provide the usual table, but really to describe in a very clear way the types of research infrastructure services and of course the estimated quantity of access that will be made available for transnational or virtual access by the co-funded calls that you will open during the life of the project. And in particular, we expect that you give a list of examples of existing installations. So really describe the type of infrastructure and the infrastructure services and give an example of existing installation. For example, if among your core beneficiaries, affiliated entities, you have access providers, this could be given as an example of installations that to which you will provide access. Also, a nuance is that the applicants to your calls are not only the users, but the users together with the facilities, the infrastructure they need. So that could include, for example, the node of distributed S3 or ERIC infrastructure. So really not only user group, but user group asking access to specific installations, specific infrastructures. Another point is that with Cascade granting, if the access providers are among the beneficiaries and affiliated entities, they are also recipient of the financial support, you have to ensure that the proposal, that you will explain carefully how you will ensure that these entities are not involved in the selection procedure of the calls. The objective is really to avoid the conflict of interest and maintain confidentiality. So that's really what I've just described is really specific to the second option, financial support to third parties with Cascade granting. Of course, if you have the normal implementation by the consortium, you always make sure that the selection procedure is also fair and transparent, and the access providers are not directly involved in the selection procedure. But that, I think in this particular case, we really wanted to highlight that. And that's all from my side. And if I well understand, I leave the floor to your back. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Agnes. We give you now a little bit of time to breathe and have a look at the Slido questions, perhaps, because there are quite a few questions coming in that we will have to see among us and the others that will join us from the team for the questions and answers, who is best placed to answer them. So yes, we go now to a couple of slides on program co-fund actions and Cascade funding, because this is a very technical issue, and whoever prepares a proposal to this topic will have to read a few things that are perhaps not the standard documents that you are eager to read in preparing proposals. So Natasha, next slide, please. So program co-fund action, it is something that we have introduced for the first time in Horizon 2020. And in Horizon 2020, it was mainly used for Maurice Busker-Curie, and that was the starting point for us, the so-called ERANET co-fund action. So where we were co-funding national programs that were organizing transnational calls for proposals. And therefore, if you look at the definition that comes from the general annexes of the work program, it is a very broad definition of program co-fund actions that allows a lot of different activities to be used in a lot of different contexts. But we only use them in Horizon Europe where it is clearly identified in the legal base as an option. So what does it mean in practice now for our topic at hand? Here, the main activity to be carried out is the provision of transnational access. And what you do with your co-funding is you pool resources from different institutions in order to implement joint calls for access provisions. That's the main purpose of what we want to see. You can use, as Agnes described, the possibility to go to Cascade funding, financial support third parties. If you do that, it is only in the form of grants, so you can't give prices, etc., that I mentioned in the definition, you can only do it in the form of grants. And I'll explain again in a minute what that means practically. Exceptionally, and we have to put that exception in the work program text, you can also include in the consortium beneficiaries that apply to the call. So you have basically a partner in the consortium that receives financial support from another partner. It's a particular organization, and we use that only in exceptional circumstances, but here, given the beneficiary structure, we felt it was necessary. Next slide. So we can use different funding rates. Here we went to the upper end. That's the maximum that we can give for program co-fund actions. 70% is the funding rate that applies. We have to underline when it comes to providing your co-funding, we look only at the eligible costs under Horizon Europe, which means you report 100 costs to the grant agreement and we reimburse you with 70. So the 30% that you bring as co-funding still has to fulfill the eligibility conditions of Horizon Europe, and you have to report them as well. So the co-funding is part of the reported costs. If you choose to go for the financial support of third parties, then the grants that you sign with the beneficiaries, so the money that you pay to the researchers, is the direct eligible costs. But you have to be careful. You have to describe in your proposal, and we see that in a minute, how you organize these calls. They have to be organized in a certain fashion, and only if they are organized according to our requirements, then the costs are eligible costs. So you have to be careful that you do things according to the provisions, otherwise the cost will not be accepted and you will not be reimbursed. Only those beneficiaries in the consortium that provide the financial support to third parties and pay the grants can report on these costs. And it is an exception compared to the other direct costs, such as personnel. The 25% flat rate does not apply to the cost category of providing financial support to third parties. Keep that in mind. So whatever in the grant agreement we do not reimburse with the 70%, the 30%, that is your co-funding that you put in. Now, we look at this as a grant agreement that covers the entire consortium. And the consortium has to decide, as usual, but here it's particularly important, how do you distribute the union contribution, so the 70%, among partners? You can decide that everybody gets 70% of their eligible costs, or you might come to a different conclusion and you say, for example, the organization that is signing the grant agreements and providing the financial support to the third parties, that's the majority of costs, has a different reimbursement rate. You have to discuss that in the consortium and you have to put that in the consortium agreement. This is extremely important. That's the one important element that you have to discuss and agree. You don't have to describe that in the proposal, but it has to be described in the agreement between the consortium partners. Very, very crucial. Next slide, please. Now, the next 3 slides are all about cascading grants. And here, crucial, go to the Horizon Europe program general annexes, and in particular, the annotated model grant agreement, and read the provisions that apply to financial support third parties, because you have to reflect that in your proposal. So other than a classical research proposal, here you have to describe technicalities of implementation that have to be precise and that have to comply with the different points that are described in the annotated model grant agreement. If you don't do it correctly, again, I repeat, costs are not eligible and will not be reimbursed. So part of the things that you have to describe is how do you organize the calls, how do you evaluate proposals, etc., etc. For the call publication, of course, you can do that on your own dedicated web pages, but all calls will also be published on our funding and tenders portal, which means we ensure with this broad accessibility, a good visibility, and the project officer in the research executive agency that will be running these grant agreements will make sure that indeed the information is in a timely fashion put on the portal. Next slide, please. This is coming straight out of the model grant agreement. So you are required to describe the conditions that you will use. So what is the maximum amount that you pay? And we have a maximum amount that is defined in our call text. You have to describe how you calculate the amount. So what are also eligible costs on the end of on the side of the end beneficiary? What are the activities that the beneficiaries can carry out? So it's basically access provisions here. What kind of individuals and legal entities will be supported? And the procedures, as I said, call organization, etc., that will apply. Next slide, please. You also have to describe in the proposal who will be in charge in the consortium organizing the calls. You will also have to design a template for the agreements between the beneficiary of the consortium that is providing the financial support and the ones that receive the financial support. It doesn't have to be as complicated as our grant agreement, but you have to have something in place. If you should choose to go for the option that also legal entities in the consortium can apply at the same time to the calls, you have to be very precise in your proposal how you establish a wall between those that are preparing and implementing the calls, in particular for the proposal evaluation, but also already for the call text preparation, a wall between those that organize the call and those that potentially apply to the call and are inside the consortium. This is a reputational issue. You don't want to have a problem afterwards that applicants apply because they fear there was an unfair competition between those that are inside the consortium and those that apply from the outside. Once you have organized the call, received the proposals, evaluated the proposals, and selected those that you want to fund, you have to provide the Commission with what we call a commitment on the availability of fund, where you sign up. These are the selected proposals for total volume of X euro, and yes, we have the resources to fund these. And then at the end of the implementation of these actions, you have to report to the Commission then the costs that have been incurred for funding the projects. Very important. And that has an impact on the timing of your proposal and the calls that you want to implement. Only the costs that are reported during the duration or that are incurred during the duration of our grant agreement with you are eligible, which means if you have a call and you sign a grant agreement and the grant agreement is running for 6 months, it has to be terminated, finished, and paid before our project with you is finalized, because only then you get fully reimbursed. Any underlying grant agreement for the financial support of third parties that is sticking out beyond the end of our grant agreement is by definition not fully covered by our grant agreement. So take that into account when you plan your activities. I'm sure the colleagues that we look through in the negotiations after your proposals will also keep an eye on this, but this is very important that you have a good understanding of the timing of your calls and the underlying grant agreements in case you go to Cascade granting to financial support to third parties. This is relevant for the INFRASERV topic 03 that we are looking at right now, but it's also relevant for at least one of the EOS topics that we are presenting in the afternoon. We understand that this is a topic that often leads to many questions, and we plan to address the most relevant ones also in FAQ parts that we are going to put on the funders and tenders portal. Good. So this is all from my side. We will now slowly go into addressing the questions and answers. Just another reminder for the hashtag RIID 2022. And we are now trying to get the Slido questions on the screen, and then we are going to dispatch them to the most competent colleagues. We can see them, Natasha, but very small. Sorry. Natasha, this is slowly getting better, but I think our colleagues have to remove my video, otherwise this is still going to be too small. Better, voila. So now, perhaps we take them from the top, and I leave it to you, Agnes, to see if you reply to questions or if you invite some of our colleagues. So as we start with the first one, can research infrastructure tackle more than one area under the first INFRASERV topic, challenge driven? Can they combine areas in one proposal?
So, can tackle more the combine climate risk, Arctic region, they are all yes. We expect one proposal, different proposal per area. So what is possible is to have the same infrastructure part of different project, but we expect a different project under each area. I think it's not reasonable. So I understand that the question is more, can the same research infrastructure be part of different project under different area? It's true that we have tried to have a kind of complementary approach, calling different fields that are complementary. But it's perfectly acceptable that the same infrastructure is part of different proposal under different area. You just have to make sure that you have to should all the areas you are participating in be selected, that you are able to provide access, you have the resource to provide the support needed to be part of different several projects in parallel. So the answer is yes. But we expect one project per area.
Very good. Yes. Do you want to simply continue with the questions?
Yeah. Sorry. So in the past, it was possible to combine research and innovation activities. Okay, I have a request. Is that mine? Okay, I have a request to reboot my computer. We will avoid that. Is that possible to combine research and innovation activities? There is a reference to a budget 50%. We don't have any indication of budget. What you have to keep in mind is that the focus, the core objective of this INFRASERV, and that's valid for all INFRASERV. It's very difficult if it's moving all the time. I've lost the question. Okay, I can reply to it. So the main objective of this destination is to offer access. So we are not giving any indication of percentage of budget per category of cost, but the focus is on providing access related services. What you can do is to have some activities to synchronize, customize, adapt incremental adaptation of the existing services. What you can do as well is some limited development to improve the services, but here is again it should be very limited, meaning that during the life of the project you are able to make available the improved or new services made available to the community during the life of the project. So I would, I cannot give any percentage, but if you come back with a proposal where in this scheme where you have 50% of the budget for activities that are not providing access, you must very well justify why. Because really the focus is on providing access. I cannot see the other question. Is that normal? Okay, I have a screen.
There they're coming back. Okay.
Okay, otherwise I'm moving to okay. Whenever how can applicant make the link with the second pillar? So for the second pillar, you can you can make sure that when you first at proposal stage, when you prepare the proposal, you have to make sure that you are aware of what the ongoing main initiative and project that are already ongoing under Horizon Europe in the other pillar, and you can adapt your portfolio of facilities, adapt your portfolio of services to what is already ongoing. What we invite you, but is that during the life of the project, you also are following what's going on. Normally, it's close to your research area, your domain, and you should be aware. And you have the opportunity, if needed, to adapt your services to better answer the need of these new initiatives that take place during the life of the project. So how you can do that? Just being aware, even if it's not the majority of the funding, you have some, you can have some activities which is just keeping yourself aware of what's going on in the other pillar and adapting, making sure that these communities under other pillar are aware of the service that you will provide, because a key element also is to advertise, raise awareness of your facilities, of the proposal of the project overall, but also of the type of services that you will make available, advertise your call, and that's a key element. So if you have to have dedicated activities for that, outreach activities for sure. For co-fund action, are permanent and non-permanent staff eligible to prove? So that I will leave that to you, Jörg, I think, this question.
Yes, with pleasure. So everything that you can report as eligible cost to the project can be taken into account, as long as it's also described in your proposal. Now, in this particular case, for access provisions, if you go for the scenario that you do not use financial support to third parties, so the access provision is only within the members of the consortium, then of course the researchers that are on your payroll and that benefit from the access provisions are producing with their salaries eligible costs. If you go to the financial support to third parties, you're giving a grant agreement to someone else. And of course, on that end beneficiary side, again, the salaries are part of what can be taken into account, but you will have only a small part of resources internally, because you want to go a maximum amount to go into financial support to third parties. So only the remaining costs that you have in the consortium for the coordination, for organizing the calls, etc., this can be taken into account. But this, by definition, of course, is only a small part of the overall costs of the project. The majority of costs we expect to go into the provisions of financial support to third party, and in general into access provisions. And back to you, Agnes.
Thank you, Jörg. How can applicant make the no, that I already replied. Does service development fit into the call, or do such type of activities be covered by Infratech? So I think I more or less already replied, but if you have limited service development, that fits into the call, in particular service integration combinations that fit perfectly. And we don't expect such type of activity to be really covered by Infratech. Under Infratech, you will really work on more long-term development that with new instrumentation, really completely new services. So more in-depth development of services will be covered by Infratech. More incremental improvement of existing services, integration combination fits perfectly in this call. Could you better define what access program managers are? I believe it's really depends on the domain, on the facilities, or even on the countries involved. So if, for example, in some case, you have some, let's say, access program are managed at a national level, or it could be that per domain, for example, if you have a distributed research infrastructure, you have a central hub, for example, within an ERIC that is managing the access, that I would call access program managers. It could be a national body that is providing access, managing the access, managing the selection of external users. So it really depends on the organization at infrastructure level or at national level. But that's really the entities that usually will open access to facilities, to a set of facilities, be it at national level or at European level. So this is what I would call the program manager, and in some cases, the program managers are the infrastructures themselves. Research and development semiconductors. We will easily encourage how the submission of one large proposal with comprehensive infrastructure services instead of several fragmented ones. I think that's a key message not only for semiconductors, but for all the INFRASERVs that we tried to, we encourage consortia and existing communities building on what has been done in the past. Again, we are not starting from nothing, from zero. We had in the past some communities that have been already supported for their integration, for access, transnational and virtual. So we are encouraging these communities to come together. So we expect in the ideal world, we would expect one proposal bringing the largest relevant portfolio of services and facilities in one single proposal per area. But competition is open, so if it makes sense to have some different proposal in competition under the some area, that's fine. But it's not what we encourage. How? That's up to, I think you know the communities if you refer to Horizon 2020 and the first call under Horizon Europe. The communities are known. Your national contact point knows the communities, and you can facilitate this connection between different communities.
Perhaps I take two ones on co-fund.
Yeah.
So in-kind contributions, we don't see where your co-funding comes from in the sense that it is in the end the institutional funding that you receive, for example, or a contribution from another funder. But in kind is nothing that you can report in your proposal or in the final reporting for your project. You can only report costs that you incurred during the duration of the project and that are eligible under Horizon Europe. That is the bottom line that you have to take into account, and you have to describe in your proposal where the 30% come from. Is it institutional block funding that you receive? Is it an additional grant that you receive? This is then something that you will have to describe for the partners in the consortium. Now, if you go for the cascading granting option, then of course you can decide to implement a number of different calls. And therefore also, as in this case suggested, have different call topics that address users or platforms or combinations. That's up to you to decide whatever fits your needs best. And INFRASERV, there is also exactly so for you.
Cross-disciplinary on the scope. Could you please elaborate further? So it will depend on the topic and on the area for the first topic. What is meant here by cross-disciplinary is really to move from the communities that we used to support under, for example, FP7 Horizon 2020, where usually we would support one class of research infrastructure or a limited number of type of infrastructure under the same project. So here we want to have more heterogeneous infrastructure coming together to facilitate multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary. So I don't have in mind the precise definitions there, but to really move forward from what was the state of the art under Horizon 2020, for example, to more cross-disciplinary approach, because the challenge, for example, for the challenge-driven part, or even the scientific challenge under the curiosity-driven one, we can see that there are some advancements based on multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approaches. So it's really something that's important that should be taken into account when you build your portfolio of facilities. So we expect this cross-disciplinary coming from the portfolio of facilities and by combining, customizing your services. I don't know if I'm clear enough. I think in some areas there was some example, more specific example given. So please refer to the detail of the work program. Does the third topic have the same 3 domain? Not at all. It's the co-fund is open to all SNT domain, curiosity-driven domain, and it's not at all connected to or restricted to the priority domains under the second topic. In the case of structure networks, the core partners is naturally the ERIC or the ASBL, but how to cope with the criteria 3 core beneficiaries. So I can answer for the ERIC. So for the ERIC, it's considered it's a EU, it's an entity created under EU law. So it's considered a EU body in the sense of Horizon Europe, meaning that you need to have at least 3 ERICs, and let's say the 3 different member states or associated countries does not count, because each ERIC is considered being located in a country which is different from those already in the core or the 2 other beneficiaries. So that's really specific to the Joint Research Center, to international organization, European organization that are considered international organization. For the ERIC, here the seat of this institution does not count. If you have 3 different ERICs, for example, even if the host is, for example, Italy, for the 3 ERICs, you are covered with, like if you had 3 different member state associated countries.
I think with this we are approaching the end of our questions. So I look at our Slido manager that is now cleaning everything up, which means there's nothing else. And
maybe I could just, sorry, Jörg,
yeah.
Maybe I could just add one thing, that in case of doubt of an eligibility criteria, please do not hesitate to ask for confirmation to your national contact point and to the support that is mentioned, the support contact that is mentioned under each call. That's really important. Don't stay in doubt. Sorry, Jörg. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Okay, then I would suggest that we close the session for now, and we start again at 12:35 with the destination Infratech, where we have one topic that we would like to present, and then we have a lunch break and continue the afternoon with EOSC. Many thanks for everyone. Many thanks, Agnes, and see you back in a bit. Bye.